Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
Welcome to the Think Factory's Workplace podcast, powered by OGC Solutions, the podcast where we explore the ever-evolving landscape of workplace dynamics. My name is Alka Bahal. I'm a partner with Outside General Counsel Solutions and the chair of our Corporate Immigration Services Group, and I'll be your host today. I am very pleased to have with me today Erin Mills, founder and CEO of Strat House. Welcome to the podcast, Erin.
Thank you, Alka. Really happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Can you start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and Strat House?
Yeah, of course. So Strat House is a boutique marketing agency. We specialize in B2B experiences. So that really means that we produce live and virtual events for a variety of clients to help advance their business objectives, whether those be internal objectives or external. A little bit more about myself. I currently reside in New Jersey in Packanack Lake, and our office is headquartered in Montclair. I have 3 children, and I'm really passionate about what I do. I love experiential marketing.
Oh, that's so terrific. Tell me, what is experiential marketing exactly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a term that kind of didn't exist about a decade ago or 15 years ago. And really what it means is using live experiences, events, said another way, to engage with others. And so what that means is, for example, if you're a company who hopes to engage with your employees, we might plan an offsite event for your team or an immersive all hands meeting. We might help with your L&D program, to make it more engaging as you're looking to train employees through enablement practices. On the external side of what we do, experiential marketing means how do you show up at a trade show? We like to call it trade showing up. How do you elevate your presence at a trade event, perhaps going beyond a traditional trade show booth? What can you do to really capture attention? It also might pertain to conferences. You might be familiar with the term, Alka, unconferencing, right? How do you make a conference more meaningful, more engaging? How do we get away from just the broadcast forum of sitting in a ballroom all day, and how do we use these live experiences to really move the needle for customers and prospects?
That's really interesting. I didn't even know things like that existed.
Yeah, they do. And they're typically a byproduct of just fulfilling a need, right? I mean, when you think about it, and it's funny because our agency is dedicated to B2B marketing, right? Business to business. We really enjoy that sector because consumer marketing's exciting and fascinating, but we think, well, we spend so much of our lives at work. Why can't work life and the events associated capture everyone with the, and create the same level of fanaticism for your company, for your customers that a consumer campaign would, right? So that's kind of how we view it. And we really we think that, there can just be a lot more fun and more meaning found at work.
So interesting. So experiential marketing, as you said, is a relatively new sort of, we'll call it a niche market, or a niche aspect of marketing. Is that something you always thought you would be in, or how did you end up in it?
Oh, how much time do we have, Alka?
I know you took a bit of a circuitous path.
I did take a circuitous path. I didn't. If we want to go way back to the beginning, I actually majored in film production, film and media studies. I always knew I wanted to be where the action was. I loved the idea of creating something, to produce it all, to produce results. And I don't think I understood that events as an industry wasn't even an option. I never certainly knew that. So early on, in my first job out of college, actually, I was able to use some of that media and film expertise. I worked for a DVD technology company, and this was when DVDs were all the rage.
Yes.
So now I'm dating myself. But because of my relationships through college and my internship, which one of them was with Buena Vista Pictures, a subsidiary of Disney at the time that was handling their home entertainment, I was able to leverage that into my first position working for this DVD technology company. From there, that company was sold. And I was then able to kind of quickly pivot and decide that, well, I'm looking for my next career move and trying to identify what I liked. I was doing marketing and kind of PR on entry level, and kind of worked my way up into like a mid-level marketing manager at that organization. When that company was sold, I needed to quickly produce some income. And so I walked into our local Ultra Lounge nightclub that was opened. And this was back in the heyday of like Sex and the City days where everyone was tuning in to watch Carrie Bradshaw going out for, cosmopolitans with her gals in the city at these new like Ultra Lounge environments. Well, one happened to pop up in New Jersey. So I went in to see if I could maybe waitress or hostess, and ended up leveraging that into a role as a manager. And what happened during that time was our ownership saw a possibility. This is a great club. Everyone loves coming to the Ultra Lounge for dinner and dancing. But is there an opportunity to start hosting events here? And so there was sort of this vision that we could become this preeminent venue, in northern New Jersey to host corporate events, weddings, fashion shows. And so during my time at this nightclub, that's where I fell in love with events, such that I eventually realized that this was an industry. And I actually also discovered that NYU has a wonderful continuing and professional education program, and they actually had an event program. So by virtue of that, I was able to take some classes, realize this is an industry that I want to be a part of. And through a series of fortunate connections, I found myself working in the industry. And so in the spirit of time, I'll just basically say it went something like this. I ended up being able to volunteer at Viacom doing events such as VH1 Save the Music Foundation, and then they offered me my first job as a coordinator on the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards. And so from there, I started my freelance event career, and I worked across Viacom and a lot of their properties at the time, MTV, as I mentioned, VH1, Spike Television. And then I was able to find another freelance client who I'd met very early on when I was doing that DVD technology company. And they gave me a freelance position working on a movie tour for TripAdvisor. So that's when I started producing events. And, eventually I ended up going in-house with that organization, this marketing agency, at kind of the ground level. And we built it over the last decade. And so I really was able to hone my event chops and really discover this industry that was burgeoning at the time, experiential marketing. And that's really where I learned to do what I do. And then eventually I decided I was going to do it for myself. And that's when I founded Strat House 5 years ago.
That's amazing. Life really took you on this path to bring you to this place in life.
It's true. Never underestimate the power of a nightclub in your professional journey.
What lesson? So you launched your business at an interesting point in time. So what were some of the challenges you faced and overcame in launching the business?
Great. Yeah. So as you mentioned, it was an interesting time. It was September of 2020. So at that time, events were essentially illegal. They were literally documented as not able to happen in their traditional sense, right? So events, you could not gather in a live fashion. And so at this time, I had left just a few months prior my last agency, which I had, again, as mentioned, I had the opportunity to grow that company from the ground floor. I was really lucky to be an early employee. We grew it, we sold it. And when COVID struck, we were presented with the same challenges that I was presented with just months later in starting my own business. We had to virtualize all of our solutions for our clients. So the business objectives remained, right? Everyone still needed to educate employees. They needed to retain them. They needed morale higher more than ever in this sensitive time. And the same went for their customers and their prospects. How do we connect when we're not allowed? We're prohibited from connecting in person. So that was a really steep learning curve, but it had to be accomplished really quickly. We had to figure this out. First of all, how do you do all of this online, right? There was a tremendous learning curve. Everyone had to get comfortable with video calls, all of it. But then once the basics were covered, we all had to identify, how do we make this engaging and meaningful? How do you translate what we do for a living through a screen? So luckily I had that foundational sort of knowledge going into it. And then when I decided to leave that organization, I'd been there a long time. We had sold it, and I knew I was ready for my next big thing. But for me, COVID presented the opportunity just to do just that. The whole world was shaking up, And I had three small children at home, very, very young at the time. And I knew I was going to have to play a big role in their virtual rearing, if you will, their virtual schooling. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to take a break and I'm going to try to launch this thing myself. And so that's what I did then a few months later. But it was wrought with challenges, as you mentioned. And I think it's hard enough to start your own business in any circumstance, but COVID presented a unique time because everybody was reinventing, right? And so it was hard just to even assess what our clients needed because they, in fact, themselves often didn't know what they need. And then often when it became clear, they needed it now, right? So like, okay, so this is what we need to do. So it was a really unique time to start the organization, but I also think that these times of crisis present the greatest times for opportunity, and it's really interesting to see and to meet other business owners who also founded during COVID.
Yeah, so you really took on a lot of challenges and really rose to the challenge. Really quite impressive. I would imagine you really had to stretch your creativity at that point to take all the experience you had in these live actual, we'll call them actual events. I don't know if they're virtual or they're not actual events, and then translate them to something on the screen.
Yeah. And a lot of that was also just sort of leaning into behaviors and tendencies and being realistic with your expectation. You have to understand that when someone's sitting in front of a screen, you have a fraction of the attention that you would have if
Mhm.
you're in real life with them, right? And so
Mhm.
kind of catering to that and realizing, okay, so even at home when someone's watching Netflix on a Friday night, they're probably on their phone. Maybe they're Googling something about the actor or actress. How old are they? What else were they in? There's always a second screen experience. And
Yeah.
and so kind of trying to understand the behavior patterns of folks digitally and virtually and then apply them to what we're doing from a business perspective. So like, okay, we need to have a second screen experience because we know that people will be listening to a degree, but if we can reinforce some of the stuff in chat or with this little fun ticker, like an Instagram kind of thing that like, follows the event. So we started to lean into those behaviors and it kind of, again, harkens back to our mission that B2B can and should be meaningful. Why shouldn't we adopt traditional consumer behaviors? Why shouldn't we lean into folks' passions and how they typically operate when they're having fun, right? So I think the closer we get that narrowing on that margin, the closer we get to real impact. And so I think that's what was cool. We had to be super creative and think, my God, how are we going to cut through to people? The other thing that was interesting is like, here's a great example. People were there were the boundaries were completely blurred as we all recall, right? So especially if you're a parent, like your kids are in the background, there's no place for
Mhm.
anyone to go. And so for one client in particular, we put together a family guide. We said, hey, you have to tune into this training event, 6 hours a day virtually for the next 4 days. We're not immune to the fact that you're going to have a whole audience. You're going to have your pet. You're going to have a dog. You have to walk your dog. We built in dog walking breaks. We sent out a guide that said, here are activities that your kids could do while you're engaged in this. So again, just meeting people where they are has been a big part of the
Mhm.
strategy.
That's really clever, very important to meet people where they are. I like that. And the whole idea of the second screen experience, totally guilty here. So instead of seeing that as an obstacle, building it into what you're doing, that's so smart.
We
I
try to
love it.
be.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So in your position now in running this business, obviously you need to put together a team. You need people to support you and help you and execute these things. How do I identify and find the right talent out there?
That's a great question. And that's probably the most important aspect of what I do as a leader here and what we do as an organization, because at the end of the day, we are our product. We are the ones that create the experiences. We do not have a hard good to deliver at the end of the day. The experience is our end result, but it's the process that gets you there. That's typically how we develop these close relationships with our clients. And it's the people that you work with, right? It's the folks that bring the ideas to the table, but then in turn know how to go and execute them to the standards that we desire for you and your company. So identifying talent, one of the biggest recipes for success that we've had is by leveraging the relationships we've built professionally over the years across so many different mediums. And one of those is actually, interestingly enough, our clientele. So there are several producers at Strat House who were former clients, either of Strat House or of mine at my last agency. And why this model I think works tremendously well is because the perspective that they bring is unparalleled because they've had the client experience. And when you look at agency life versus brand life, it's
Mm-hmm.
quite different. Everyone works just as hard, regardless of what side you're on. But when you're at an agency like Strat House, you're working across multiple clients, multiple verticals. So
Mm-hmm.
I might be at 12 o'clock, I might be on the phone with a health tech company, and then the very next hour be on the phone with the National Women's Soccer League. And so you have to have this ability to really switch quickly gears and priorities and just like shift your foundational knowledge of the conversation around. So working with the client helps us because we want every client to feel like they're our only client. Realistically, they're not, and they know that, of course. But so having former clients come in, they understand the client expectations. But then when
Mm-hmm.
they see it from our perspective, they've been tremendous additions to the team at helping us think through how do we scale more readily, knowing how much we have going on, and how much the client expects. So it's been fantastic. That's been a wonderful model that's worked really well for us. Another key thing that's been integral to our approach to talent is the diverse backgrounds with which from which we all come. And so, as mentioned, you've heard me mention a few times, we really believe in developing fanaticism. Why can't marketing on the B2B side feel more like consumer marketing? And so some of our backgrounds are in entertainment. Like I mentioned, I came from, having worked had opportunities on the Video Music Awards, for example, Kids' Choice
Mm-hmm.
Awards. So when you bring in that kind of entertainment background, you can apply that to any model of business on this side. And so that's really fun. So I really enjoy the diverse backgrounds of the team, and so a lot of it is just relationship based. It really is. Having worked this long in the industry, you know, it's really, really helpful to leverage our network when we're looking for new talent.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, and I'm sure it's that combination of the brand side folks, the entertainment folks, the talented, people from different agencies. You've got to bring all of that together in order to really deliver an experiential marketing. Very interesting. So once you have your talent, as any employer knows in the U.S. these days, it's difficult to keep that talent. So what do you think are some key factors driving talent retention in this competitive market?
Yeah, well, it's a very similar strategy to the one I just discussed for audiences. Meet your teams where they are and be really authentic about where you are and where the company is. So I had mentioned as we were jumping on today, we have just finished our offsite. So we brought our team together. We're largely virtual. We see each other at the events we produce, which are all over the country and the globe. And although headquartered here in Montclair, I have team members in Canada. I have folks, up in Boston. We have people on the West Coast. So we're decentralized, which benefits us greatly. But we do come together, and that's so important. That's a huge part of retention is creating those connection opportunities that are in real life, unplug, devices down. Let's look each other in the eyes. Let's learn more about our passions, our families. Let's just connect as humans, right? So we've spent a week doing that. But of course, layering the business on top of that. And part of my strategy this week for my team was like, I just really want to authentically tell you where I think we're at as an organization and where I think we're going to go in the next 5 years. And so I think retention, I think so much of what can create gaps in trust and misalignment in vision is when A, there's not a clear vision for the organization and why you're doing what you're doing, and then B, where you're headed, because everyone has their own individual goals and objectives. And so their careers and how they spend their time, the majority of their time, is going to factor into that. And teams need to understand what that means. They need to understand how their work is going to be rewarded, and they also need to feel that they're working, I think, with organizations and clients who they believe in. If you're going to be dedicating so much of your time to work, make sure that it's worth it, that you're creating impact for your clients and that they're worthy of that impact. That's a big thing around here is what clients do we want to take on? We're working so hard. Are we working hard for the right kind of profile, the right kind of person, right?
Hmm. Interesting. So you vet your clients as well as your hires.
To a degree, we do. I mean, and certainly you have to be agile as a small organization. We're a boutique agency. There's a lot of thought that goes into, first and foremost, can we deliver what they want? Like, hands down. We want to be in a position where we're subject matter experts and we can deliver what we think. I shouldn't even say that actually, not what they want, because sometimes what people want and what they need and or what their results are not aligned. So that's part of Strat House, right? The name is rooted in strategy. We want to help you get to your objective. And a lot of times clients walk in and what they think they want actually won't get them to where they need to be and want to be. And so that's always an interesting process. So I think that's our first vetting, if that's a great word for it, Alka. Like, that's our first consideration set. Can we actually help them? Can we help them? And then from there, it's, again, agency life is fascinating, especially one that we have a few retainer clients, but we're largely project based, right? So that's the next evaluation point. Where are we from a resourcing perspective? We have a really great boutique core crew. And then we have a ton of tentacles from a freelance perspective. We can activate in many different markets, even globally. But again, what's the bandwidth, everyone? Can we activate this? We don't have, a calendar of the year. I mean, we get calls and, hey, you need to have an event ready in 3 weeks. Can you help us? That type of thing. So sometimes we have to vet those opportunities and just say, it's not realistic. We can't topsy-turvy the rest of the organization or clients just because it's a great opportunity for some new revenue. So there's a lot of it that goes into that. And there's been instances where we're actively engaged with the client and we feel that we can no longer deliver what they need. And those have been real opportunities to, I think, test our value system, test what does it mean to the organization to retain a client versus to walk away when you realize it's no longer a good fit. And so those have been some of the, I think, challenges and opportunities of growing an agency, and year one, I think you and I chatted about this when we first met, year one, it's all about just staying afloat and figuring out your business model. You think you know what your business is, but until you get out there, you don't really know.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that soul searching and like needing to keep the lights on year one and let's do this and let's do that. And that's great and fine. And like, no one should be afraid to test and learn, but you need to do it with integrity. You need to be candid with your clients, what you can and can't deliver on. And with your team, I think that's super important. Like explaining to your team, why are we taking on this client? Or this seems slightly out of our wheelhouse. Why are we doing this? Or vice versa, for your team to have I think, the trust and assurance that if they voice concerns in your direction, that you'll take them seriously. So I'm interested, and I hope to create a culture where our team feels that they can ask those type of questions. Like, why are we spending so much time on this client? Or like, what do you see as the end game? Because again, back to your retention question, if those questions can't be asked upstream, then I think that is not the kind of culture that's going to ultimately thrive long term.
Absolutely. And you need to have a welcoming and open culture in order to keep people, right? Everybody wants to be in an environment where they can thrive.
Absolutely.
In that same vein, what do you think are some key traits that leaders need to possess in today's world to be successful?
That's a great question.
I think you talked about some being, open, willing to listen and hear from your employees. This is something I hear consistently from companies such as yours that are successful and keep employees. It's not something every company has or every leader exhibits. So I think that's from my perspective, definitely a unique trait that you have that I think leaders should possess.
Well, that's absolutely paramount, because at the end of the day, I think like it's just essential to get that feedback loop going early and often. And it's definitely lacking among a lot of leaders today. And I think there's so much pressure, obviously, on leaders, depending on where you're at, whether it's you answer to a board, you answer to shareholders, you answer to investors. So I think oftentimes leaders, they have a vision, they know what needs to get done, but they know that they don't have many hours in the day. And so they just have to act, they have to transact, they have to do what they need to do to keep the company going, to create that return on investment, to keep it. But unfortunately, and they might be very effective at making those moves, but their lack of communicating the vision and strategy just creates so much waste and unnecessary churn at the levels below them. And we see this often with large corporate clients where, we might be working on an event for weeks or months with, a particular team, but because that team hasn't had the option to get in front of leadership, or, by the time it finally reaches leadership, they're like, well, this is actually not at all what we need to be doing. And so there's so much malalignment, misalignment at that level. So much is wasted from a resource perspective, a cost perspective, and most importantly, from a time perspective. And so I think if leaders, even though it's tedious, you have to be an effective communicator. You have to let people know what's going on. You have to let them buy into the vision. And I think the best leaders I know do that. I mean, I just said the word communication. That's essential. That's essential. And I think it doesn't need to be laborious. It's literally just being disciplined enough to put some type of a cadence together where you can authentically communicate. And, a large part of what we do for clients on the internal side is we help to make their virtual events more engaging, whether that be a sales kickoff. We produce them in their own right, but often they'll come to us even for small things. Like we have an all hands meeting once a month. It's on Zoom. How can we make it more engaging? And I often sit on those calls and we can play little games. We can do things that are fun. Absolutely. We can lighten the mood. We can get a fun Slack conversation going. We excel at that. That's easy table stakes for us. We can make it fun. But it doesn't matter if it's fun or engaging if you're not responding to and or believing what you're hearing from leaders. And so many times I know actually what's going on behind the scenes because we're invested at a stakeholder level. But when they come to the meeting, they sanitize it. And everybody knows what's really being said. Right? And so I think, and listen, there are instances where things just have to be sanitized, and we understand that but I think to the degree that folks can just strip away some of the bureaucracy and just show up and be authentic. And it's also okay for leaders to just admit that they don't know all the answers. And it's very okay. And the best leaders I know admit mistakes readily. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think that is a definitely a key trait, the authentically communicating, and the humility, being able to say, I'm wrong, or I made a mistake, or buy into somebody else's viewpoint over your own. Certainly that's something that you exhibit that's probably made you and your team pretty tight. So what would you say is your most notable accomplishment so far?
So I think my most notable accomplishment so far is creating and maintaining Strat House as an organization while parenting my 3 children. Because at the end of the day, that was my driving force for creating Strat House. And listen, we spoke a lot about this week at my team offsite. We have a business why, and then I have a personal why. And my personal why for creating Strat House was at this juncture in my life, starting a family had been so important to me. And when we finally had the opportunity and were blessed to do so, I wanted to work in an environment and for an organization where I had agency. I could choose where my time belonged and who I was going to give it to. And that's not to say that my clients don't tell me when they need my time, and my team doesn't tell me when they need my time. There's a lot of needs of my time. But much like what we were just discussing, I'm now in a position where I know that if my family needed me, that I could answer to myself, and those consequences would be mine to have and own. And so if that meant turning down a client, if that meant not getting on an airplane, that I had the agency to do that, and that I myself alone would be reckoning with those consequences, which I'm very comfortable with, because at the end of the day, I'm always going to choose my family. And I hope everyone always makes that choice. But unfortunately, so many people are not in a position to have that agency. So that was my biggest reason for starting Strat House, and it remains my why to this day. And so with that, though, and this was a big part of scaling that was really challenging between years 1 and 3, was we did have a lot of opportunity. I honestly, Alka, when I started this, I really thought it would be a slow go. I'm going to start consulting. It's COVID, whatever. It really exploded far faster than I believed it would. And it was certainly a blessing, but it started to really present sort of this dilemma, because I was finding myself working the craziest hours again, getting, working 18, 20-hour days. And again, started to really have to try to reconcile, well, wait a minute. Isn't this why we started this company? So that you had this, you could really choose where your time was going. So I had to really look critically at like, how do I scale? How do I do this? Amid the backdrop of the personal why,
Yeah.
and then the company why is again the belief that we can and should be able to impact, professionals at work and with their clients and customers, with passion and ethos, and really bring fun and meaning and change to workplace environments, right? So that's the company why. And the personal why is really different. And you know what? It's funny as I am espousing all of my positions, and I forget what the original question was. So you're gonna have to bring me all the way back, because here I go.
It was your most notable accomplishment.
Oh,
And
my
I
most
think,
notable accomplishment.
yeah, I think
Okay.
you described it well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you so much for bringing me back. The point being that once I got through kind of the initial growing pains and I was able to recalibrate with my personal why, I have been able to grow a business. I'm still working my tush off, right? That hasn't changed, but I'm doing so more so on my terms and be there for my kids. So it's like incredible. I'm the Girl Scout troop leader. I can leave the office in the middle of the day to go attend a band concert. If one of my children is homesick, it's a lot easier for me to stay home with them than perhaps someone who doesn't have that flexibility. So when I sit back and I can remove myself from the day-to-day stress and hustle that we all endure, I feel very grateful. And that is my biggest accomplishment, that I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm not sure how long I'll do it. I'm going to try to sustain as long as I can. And you just never know what life has around the corner and where your time will be needed. But as of right now, it certainly stands to be my biggest accomplishment. And I hope my children, and it's, just like every child who has a working parent, and certainly one that travels, and I do travel extensively, there are times where it's very hard for them to see me go, get on another airplane. But I do think that they see what I'm doing. They like coming to the office. They're very engaged in what we do as an organization. They've come to a little part of one of our team offsites before and met the team. So
Oh, that's so
so
nice.
so that to me is my biggest accomplishment, that I'm doing what I set out to do.
I love that. And you've definitely done that well. When you're able to integrate your work life and your family life, even though there's always this constant balancing act, very admirable what you have achieved. And Strat House is going on 5 years now?
That's correct. It'll be 5 years in September.
Oh, that's very impressive. I mean, to succeed in the first couple of years during COVID for an experiential marketing company, that's just terrific. And now we've got this big push back to in person everywhere. So I imagine that is creating even more opportunities for you. So, what predictions do you have for the future of your work in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, we feel really bullish about what lies ahead, very excited. It's interesting as workforces have become distributed, right? Decentralized, so much home or sorry, virtual work environments and so much hybrid, the opportunities to come together and connect with your fellow employees or your customers and prospects are even more meaningful and important. And it's so interesting because so we're obviously on the internal level, it makes sense at face value. Of course, teams used to work together in an office. They rarely see each other. It's paramount to bring everyone together for connection. But what's interesting is we've seen like a very big pendulum shift in the role of the salesperson in the organization. Typically, a salesperson would have their contacts. You could do a little wine and dine, call on them, take meetings. Again, now that there's this massive decentralization, and now that people they value their time more than they did before COVID. COVID
Mhm.
really reset, everyone in terms of how am I gonna spend my time and what am I gonna value? So it's not as easy to get a meeting anymore. It's not as easy to get someone to meet you in the middle of the day for a cup of coffee. And so these events, these opportunities are just so much more opportunistic now, because especially trade events, right? So when you're getting a whole trade together for a conference, for example, we were at the International Franchise Association show last week in Las Vegas. This is an opportunity to connect with suppliers, with with customers, with prospects, and an entire industry to look at that perspective. And so we're finding people are cramming so much into these opportunities because it's an organic way just to extend what you're doing. And so for our industry, that means everything because we have these sanctioned times when a population will come together. Let's leverage the heck out of it. We know all these people are going to be in the same city for a week. And so it's really changed the game in terms of sales, business development, and marketing functions that were historically handled differently. So we feel really excited about it. Obviously, AI is at the forefront of every conversation everyone's
Yes.
having, right?
Mhm.
And for us, it's been a really exciting opportunity. I'd say it's now more common than less that AI is used to generate content for our events. And also, even in the planning process, it's unbelievable what AI can do. And for us, often AI can be perceived as threatening, certainly so. For us, it's actually like a hall pass. It really accelerates a lot of processes that can be either administratively cumbersome. It really just lays a lot of foundational work, either in the planning of events or the content, getting it mapped out. That's been awesome. And it really does. I mean, there's so much, obviously, there's a lot of concern around AI and understandably so, but we're really excited about what it means for our industry, for the efficiency in which we operate, and the kind of ingenuity that we can bring, at scale at a relatively low cost because of it.
Oh, very interesting. Yes, AI is definitely part of the future, one way or the other.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And the other interesting thing, I mean, again, as optimistic as we are, like many industries, there is a cyclical nature of what we do because events are often thought of, at least historically they had been, of they're sort of an extraneous item on the P&L, right? When you have to
Mhm.
tighten purse strings, sharpen pencils. Sometimes the events budgets are the first to go. And the reason is because the ROI is so nebulous, right? Events are a great connection tool. They're qualifiable by all means. Everyone comes back enthused, excited, re-energized, invigorated, ready to do their job. I've met 12 new people. I've met 20 new people. And that is often the catalyst for then what becomes the funnel, right? Then you actually can nurture those relationships, but it's so hard to measure. And so
Mhm.
that is one of the challenges of our industry is proving out the ROI. And we do a lot of work with our clients on because everyone again at a surface level, everyone recognizes the importance of events. And I often just remind people our lives are a series of events. I'm going to go to the potluck for Girl Scouts later, and then I'm going to go to a soccer game tomorrow. That's an event. Like everything we do. I mean, events are vital.
So
They
true.
are what we are, I mean, you're going to watch the Oscars. That's an event. Like our lives are basically just a series of events. So there's no question that they're vital. But when you go and look at it with like a CFO and they look at the bottom line, how much does this cost? Yeah, it costs a lot of money to bring 3,000 people to a city, when they're not working otherwise in an office building and feed them alone for 3 days.
Yeah.
So so that's the hard part. So when I mentioned the cyclical nature of our industry, when you go through these economic swings and everyone's looking for bottom line cuts, it's a lot of times events take a hit. But then what we find is that it's maybe a 2-year cycle and then they realize, oh wow, we shouldn't have done that because guess what? We haven't engaged with our customers. Employee morale is low. So
Mm.
so it can be very cyclical. The secret is just making sure that you're in a different cycle with every one of your clients so they don't all cycle out at the same
Same
at the same
time,
time,
right?
right? That's
Exactly.
agency life. Yeah.
That's very clever. So I have one last question for you, Erin, one that I did not ask you in our prep. And that is there anything in your business or in your industry that keeps you up at night?
Oh, that's a great question. Certainly. I think it's the thing that keeps us up at night as an organization is delivering on our promise. Like, how do we make sure that every person that steps through that door, that attends that event, walks away with the impact that our client hoped to deliver for them? That's what keeps us up at night. And when you think about an event, at the end of the day, you are literally, it's like inviting someone into your home, right? You're responsible for their safety. And safety extends far beyond their physical safety, which is a huge part of events, right, when they're live. But more and more so, it's their psychological safety, especially in times like this where there's so many dissenting viewpoints. And that's a big thing that keeps me up. How do we do right by? How do we prioritize who we need to prioritize? How do we make sure a big part of our missive at Strat House is ensuring that we leverage our talents and our privilege to advance equity in business, right? So the kind of things that keep me up at night is, oh, wow, like this program we're about to produce has 4 cis white men headlining it. Like, how did that happen? Like, that's not a great representation for our client, and it's not a representation of their beliefs. Like, we really take it seriously, I mean, and then let's talk about sustainability. We bring a bunch of people together. There's bound to be waste, right? Yeah. It's really, how do we sustainably produce an event with impact? How do we ensure that anything created at the event can have an extended life cycle and impact others beyond the event? We also think a lot about accessibility. In some cases, we're bringing thousands of people together. How do we give them each what they need, which could be very different, whether that be physical accessory. We think a lot about, is this too much sensory experience for people? How are we going to provide a safe space for someone who's perhaps neurodiverse, who needs to be at the event? They need to attend, they need to participate, but they're not going to be able to do so in the same way that others are. But how do we make them feel included rather than excluded as part of that process? So that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, is because the events are so powerful and they can have such an impact that the converse can be true, right? Like the alternative can be true. So if you can have such an impact, you can also completely ruin someone's perspective of a brand or an organization if you create a lousy one. So from our perspective, the stakes are really high, like super high. And then if you want to have some extra fun and pop a couple extra Tums before you go to bed, think about broadcasting to that whole event to the world via a live stream. Let's just add in internet and all the fun stuff too. So we're doing a lot of that too. So then you can just add on the fun technical worries.
Yeah, exactly.
Icing on the cake.
And Murphy's Law is bound to create some sort of complication.
Exactly. And that's the funny thing too. I mean, again, we can check every box, Alka, and we can feel so good about all the plans we have laid and every contingency plan. But then the real fun starts when the people show up. We have no idea what's going to land. We think we know. We think, you just have no idea. Once these people enter the space, all bets are off, right?
Right.
And so that's why having a really skilled group is important, because I don't want to say we've seen it all at this point, because once I do say that, the universe will hand us something very new. But you know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, and I think, again, if your intentions are in the right place and you've got the right people around you, then, I think that's where we do our best work. So
absolutely. Very, very impressive, Erin. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been Erin Mills, founder and CEO of Strat House, talking with me, Alka Bahal, partner with OGC Solutions and chair of the immigration practice. I really loved our conversation, Erin. I learned a lot. And, we need to give this experiential marketing a try one of these days.
Great. Well, we're ready whenever you are. So
terrific. Until next time, thanks. This has been the Think Factory Workplace Podcast powered by OGC Solutions. Until next time.